Now here comes the moment that I've been waiting for. Will it work? Give it 2 seconds here. There's a delay. I think everything that we're seeing here on John's machine is representative of that delay. Since I had such a monumental failure in the live stream yesterday, I want to make sure this is kind of flushed out before I really commit to it. Oh. Aha. I hear things. I see things. Yes. Great. It's working. There's a delay. Great. Wonderful. We're back in action. Aha. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. All right. So welcome back, everybody. I'm happy to see everyone. Enjoying the rain today? Enjoy it. It may be a while until it rains some more. Okay. So I'm glad that everyone is having a good week. This week in our content, we're going to be talking and exploring about some new things. And I want to focus our time today kind of in two parts. Of course, we're going to be looking at some modeling stuff. This is a modeling class. So it's really important that we spend some time revisiting some of these really important and crucial modeling ideas, specifically form. How the volume that we're building within is represented on screen and in the final image itself. So form and volume are going to be big tenets to today's conversation. In addition, we also want to talk about UV maps. Of course, UV maps. No week is going to go by without a little bit of a conversation about how to create UV maps, how to manage UV maps, and to continue looking at how we're going to be applying these UV maps inside of our texturing pipeline, okay? By now, hopefully you're starting to get a nice perspective of the complexities of the sequence that we're working within. It's not as straightforward as it once was, okay? The game industry is difficult. It really is. Creating art that flows through that pipeline is not impossible, but it's not easy either. So it's important that we take an opportunity again to re-examine that pipeline. The UV mapping stuff that we're going to go into today is pretty neat. I think you're going to like it, especially given the context of the project that you guys are going to be building this week. Okay, you're going to be building a treasure chest. Yeah, awesome, right? It's going to be a fun assignment. Everyone's is going to design their own treasure chest. So you're going to be able to make whatever style you want. You can make it look like however you want. It's going to be pretty cool. Okay. I think you guys are going to have a good time on this. This is going to be a 2-week project. This week, naturally, we're going to talk about the geometry and the UVs. And then next week, you're going to be painting all the textures. And next week's conversation is really going to allow us to go into an exploration of the hand-painted world. We've been looking at using photographs for the past couple weeks, and that's still going to be a big part of our workflow. But next week, we're going to talk about how we can include the brush system into our workflow and start hand-painting detail where we want it to go. The detail in our texture shouldn't be created exclusively from the JPEGs that we find online from the photograph. So we'll talk about that next week. Today's UV mapping conversation, I think, is going to be sentient. I think you're going to like it a lot because there's some additional tools inside of Modo that will help us quickly create some awesome rocking UVs, and we'll be exploring those here in a minute. Before we get started, however, let's just take a step back and look at precisely what we're going to be doing this week. So here's week 6. So as I mentioned, here's our homework. If you look at the assignment sheet here, our internet's running pretty slow today. Treasure chest, okay? You're just going to be focusing on the geometry and, of course, the UVs. However, there's a unique challenge this week. 500 polys, okay? We're going to be designing a treasure chest with inside a polygonal budget. So it's not just exclusively about how awesome of a design we can create. Now there's going to be some limitations, some restrictions that will influence the design of your treasure chest, okay? So we'll talk about that here momentarily as well. This is something in Simple Scenes. Some of you guys are forgetting this little item in the homework. If you go onto D2L and examine your gradebook, you can very quickly see that I've graded all the assignments that have been turned in up until about 11 o'clock this morning. And a number of you probably have noticed that I'm reducing points because of the absence of that simple scene. We want to have those in our renders, right? What is that simple scene? A wall, a ground plane, a room. What does that provide to our audience? Bingo! It helps us understand the size of our object. Without it, it's just floating in this infinite void, right? and their audience is going to have a hard time understanding the size, scale, and the proportions of what they're seeing inside the frame itself. Overall, overwhelmingly, maybe I should say, you guys are doing an awesome, awesome job on your homework, so keep it up. The projects that you guys are submitting are top-notch, so great work so far. This has been one of the better groups, it really has. Everyone seems to be producing at a very high level in here, so good job on that. Okay. So 500 polys, this is going to influence your design. This is a really great example of a low polygonal mesh, okay? We now have to start strategically designing and strategically, creating these elements, okay? We just can't just blast out polygons and infuse as many as we want. We have to think about it, okay? I've said this 2,000 times already. I'm going to say it an additional 2,000 times. It's my favorite saying. Good 3D modelers are like good chess players, right? We got to think 8 or 9 steps ahead. We have to consider and conceptualize the limitations of our environment in the actual model itself. Okay. All right, your lab assignment this week is I'm going to force my hand, because this is a skill that we all need to have mastery on, especially since we're talking about modeling this week, alignment of backdrop images, okay? I'm an old school 3D modeler. I fundamentally believe that the absence of reference images, the absence of backdrop images represents you're doing this wrong, okay? You're just modeling wrong. How we work with all these backdrop items is really crucial, and it's an important skill. So we're going to revisit the process of aligning these backdrop items, because in many ways, you should be able to go online and find some images of some treasure chests and use those as part of your construction, okay? How we use those backdrop items is important. So I wanted to talk about that again today. And your lab assignment is going to be pretty fun. It's a great opportunity for us to make a simple model of this cool little catapult, okay? There's the catapult. I've given you all the reference and backdrop items that you'll need right here, okay? So download them, align them to each other, and then you're going to be creating this catapult, okay? It's a simple model. Don't freak out about it. It's not that bad if you think about it. We're just going for the basic outline, but go crazy with it if you'd like, okay? I think the folks that really go the distance on this will leave this project with a really good rocket image, okay? A really good asset that you can continue to use. If you project yourself towards the end of the semester, this is absolutely a fun little asset that you can use in your final project, right? It's a fun one. And it's not that complex of a shape. If you look at catapult, what basic, simple shapes are we talking about here? Squares. Overwhelmingly, this thing is squares, okay? It's just squares. So it should be something at this skill level that you guys can bang out pretty quickly, okay? All right. Okay, so let's just chat for a second. Let me download the catapult reference images. And if you would like to follow along, I'll help you set up your project file right now. You're welcome. Let's just do it real fast. Now, this is something that you should have had a little bit of practice with inside of GCOM 402, but I know many of you in here, it's been some time since you've taken GCOM 402, and this skill may have gotten a little rusty. And the sequence and the thought process behind working with multiple reference items may have been lost. So I want to kind of focus on it today. Big picture, what does reference give us? Yeah, absolutely. So spatial relationship, right? It allows us to very quickly and visually understand the distance in between the wheels, where the axle is going to go, where all the bolts and maybe the swing arm needs to go in relationship to the arm that's holding it up, that little wooden beam in the center there, okay? It helps us figure out the basic construction, locations for all these elements. 3D modelers, or as 3D modelers, it's our job to recreate reality, right? And I probably should put reality in finger quotes, right? Because oftentimes the reality of the project that we're working on is not of our own, right? We could be asked to create the reality of some far-off distant planet or medieval times, or of course the modern-day world, but it's always going to be something that's defined by some concept art, by an image, by some sort of guide. So building our objects to these guides and to these realities is a critical skill, because these images define exactly what the director and the producer, your creative supervisor, is going to be expecting you to build. Now, I've given you all the ones that we're working with here. Here it is from the side. Here it is from the front. And of course, here it is from the top. These are just very simple illustrations, okay? Now, one of the big challenges that we have is ensuring that all of these images are aligned to the grid, to our three-dimensional scene. In addition, we have to make sure that they're all aligned to each other. This is really kind of a four-step process if you take a step back and look at it, okay? The first step is just getting all of these reference items into Modo and set up so that we can continue to use them in a meaningful way. Let's just do that step first. Let's launch Modo. Thinking of Modo, I think Tyler mentioned this before. It may be over right now, but they're having a flash. They extended it to 24 hours. They're having a flash sale. The Foundry's having a flash sale. So it's a great opportunity to get a whole bunch of Modo stuff that, most everything is 40% off, and then there's only a couple things that are 20% off, okay? So go check it out. Go check it out. I actually picked up a couple things at 40% off. It's a screaming good deal. And my Modo is just, there we go, just taking forever to load today. Okay. Let me show you a great trick. Of course, we can import these backdrop items easily into the scene by choosing Add Item, Backdrop Item. This we know, right? What's another easy peasy way of getting all this stuff in? Just drag and drop. A lot of folks forget about this drag and drop mentality, and I'm a hardcore Mac guy, so this drag and drop paradigm is something that's kind of part of my DNA. I really like it, okay? It works for me. I like that digital manipulation of all of my data. So I'm just going to start dragging and dropping these into the scene. Now, be disciplined. Don't try to do them all at once. Do it one at a time. I'm going to do the front. And the reason I do this is so that we can be good stewards of our scene. Okay, there's the front image. Awesome. Awesome. Now, let's be good stewards. Let's name this thing. I find folks over in the lab not doing this, okay? This is the reference item. It's from the front, okay? Make it easy for your brain to understand the role of these elements in the item list. When you're working at like 3 a.m., and we often work at like 3 a.m., right? You're going to rely upon this to get the job done. Okay, so there's the front. Now, I also need to make sure that the backdrop image projection type down here in its properties is also set to front. That way, when I change the view of my scene to see it from the front, I'm only seeing that front reference item. Okay, rock and roll. Things are looking good. Let's get another one in here. Here it is from the side. Whoop. Okay. Now, you can already begin to see one of the challenges that we have when working with multiple backdrop items. Where's the default location for all backdrop items going to be? At the origin of the scene, right? Well, my front backdrop item and now my side backdrop item are now sharing the exact same space. This is bad. This is no good, okay? So what do we need to do here? The projection type. Now, should we ever be looking to rotate these using our transform channels down here? No, absolutely not. The guys down at the Foundry have done us a solid, right? They understand our workflows as 3D modelers, and they've given us this projection type, and that's going to rotate the image for us. Now, I don't know if this is the left side or the right side, so let's just pick right, and you can see that the image has already been rotated. Let's look at our scene from the right. Here it is. And I'm going to turn on my grid. I often turn it off just to make it easier to see things. And we have the next challenge that's in front of us. By looking at the grid here, and then looking at the image, what do I need to do to my image to begin working with this thing? We need to move it up. We do need to move it up. Before we even do that, what's the first step? Why? And you're absolutely right. The positive Z represents what? The front, absolutely. Visually in the picture itself. Now I'm looking at the actual image. Where's the front of my catapult? Point to it. Right there, to the right. You got it, perfect. Which way at the moment is the front of the picture facing in my scene? How do you know that? The little badge, yeah, there's a little icon on the grid, and that's a great, I love that. I'm so thankful that the guys down at the Foundry have done this for us, because it really makes it easy for us to understand the location of the negative z values, okay? So those little badges on the grid are helpful. Now there's one other thing that also does the exact same thing. What is it? The compass. And I love me the compass, right? Because this compass in every sense are like arrows in my mind. This line here points to the positive side of that axis, right? So which way is the positive z-axis? This side, screen left. Which way is up? You got it, up. In this case, it is vertical. We got lucky on that one, right? Yeah, it should be a trick question, yeah. So use these, think of these indicator lines here as arrows. That's what I do, and it makes it easier for my little simple brain to decode exactly the orientation and the location of the positive sides of all these axes. Now, what do I have to do to my side reference image here? Flip it. We don't want to rotate it. There's only really one image that we'll want to look at rotating. We've been given an option to flip, so I'll just flip it real fast, enable that option, bloop, and now the image has been rotated 180 degrees, and life is good. Okay, exactly what I want. If you notice the transform channels, this is what it should look like. We haven't moved it into position, we certainly haven't rotated it, and of course we haven't scaled it yet. All right, last but not least, let's look at it in the perspective. Things are looking dialed in here. Great. Last but not least, let's do the top. Let's throw that in here. There we go. And of course, the exact same process is going to be repeated. We're going to change the projection type to top. Let's take a look at it in that view and ensure that life is good. Is life good? Do I need to flip this one? Why not, Josh? It's facing the positive z. You got it, right? On the image itself, the details that describe the front of the catapult in the image are facing the positive area of the z-axis, so don't need to flip this one. Oftentimes when you're working with reference, it's the top one that needs to be rotated, okay? It all kind of depends on how the details of the picture are, orientated in the reference image itself, okay? All right. I'm going to do this real fast, just to make it a little bit easier. I often want to see through my image to the grid behind. What do I need to change in order to get that? Yeah, and you can do all of that at once, or you should be able to do all at once. Let's just put that to 70, okay? Let's look at it from the right. Yep, that's good. And the front as well, okay? Now we can see through to the grid behind. We've imported our image. We got them all facing the positive z. What's the next step in our alignment phase here? And you're right, that's step number 4. Step number 3 here, we align it to the grid. Okay, grid first, okay? Now, let's do some deconstruction on this element, okay? Talk to me about the totality of the model that you're going to be making. What do you see in here? Think big picture. Think like a chess player. The first question that I always ask myself, is this a symmetrical or unsymmetrical object? Symmetrical. It's symmetrical, right? It's symmetrical. So, with that said, where should I be placing the front image? In the center of what? The y-axis up and down, right? Left and right is which axis? The x to the center of the x-axis, okay? Yeah, it can get a little confusing because oftentimes you see this line here and you think that that's the y-axis. Well, it's really not, okay? This is the center line of the x-axis, okay? Where would be the center line of the y-axis? That horizontal guy, that one way up there. That's the center of the y-axis. Remember, y is up and down, x is left and right. Now, looking at the image itself, are we there? Is this image, and specifically the details, the catapult itself, not the container of the backdrop item, but the actual pixels that describe the catapult, is that centered along the x-axis? Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Okay, so left and right is dialed. Now we got to think about up and down. Where are we going to place this element along the y-axis? What makes sense? Should we leave this reference image vertically where it is, or should we make a change? Move it up. Why? So the wheels are on the ground. Yeah, I like it. That's a great suggestion. We could move it up so the wheels are on the ground. What this gives us in the long term is that when we import this object into another application, like let's say our game engine, it's automatically going to be placed on the ground of our level, which is pretty cool. If we leave it as is, we'll always have to go into the game engine and vertically translate that object along the y-axis. If we initially model it on the ground, if you will, okay, then we sidestep and completely, kind of move around that additional step inside of our game engine. Let's just do it real fast. So I'm going to grab the item, fire off the move tool. I'm just going to start pulling this up so the wheels are on the ground. And that's pretty close. That's pretty close. Okay? Awesome. So now let's go over to our right image and do the same, right? I'm going to grab this one, fire off the move tool. Whoop. And we are off to the races right around, perhaps in there. That's close enough for government work. Okay, great. Now for the top image, what do I need to do for the top image? What alignment to the grid am I looking to do with the top image? Not yet, because we're still on the grid stage. But I like the way you're thinking. We probably should also start to analyze its location in reference to the center of the x-axis, right? Because from the top, we get a really good understanding of its symmetrical shape. So I just want to just kind of check it out here. In my mind, what I'm looking at, always look for markers, okay? There's usually something in the mesh. There's almost always a center line somewhere in the mesh that tells us its relative placement or where it should be placed in reference to the grid, okay? And if you look very carefully at that crossbeam that's on the bottom of the catapult, it's not perfectly aligned to the center of the x-axis, okay? Because the center would be at the intersection of both of those crosses, right? Both those beams. The center line of the x-axis is represented by this dark line here, and we can clearly see that it's not in the center of the x, and it's certainly not in the center of that bolt in the center. So let's just move it real fast. Make sure I have it selected. Zoom in, fire off the move tool, and if your action center is turned off to none, you can actually, well, I take that back. Since we're in item mode, it's not going to allow me to do that. Let's just translate it over a little bit. Boop. Somewhere right around in there, you'll have to make a guess. Looks like that circular piece and the object itself are not centered to each other, so just guess. You're going to have to guess. Somewhere right around. I'm going to use the circle as the guide for me. Somewhere right around in there. As 3D modelers, these reference images are kind of like the pirate laws, right? They're guidelines. They kind of get us in the ballpark, okay? They get us to about the 30-yard line, and then it's our job as the artist to take it into the end zone, okay? I see a lot of folks, and I get caught up in this process as well. I see a lot of folks spending way too much time trying to make their reference items just absolutely perfectly aligned to each other. And in most cases, they're never going to be aligned to each other, okay? The human element is always infused in every single line drawing that we ever work with, right? The artist that created these images could have accidentally just not drawn it correctly, which is absolutely part of the challenge that we're working with, okay? So get them close. It's your job as the artist to complete and take it into the end zone, okay? Just get it close. Alrighty. All right, so now that we have all of our images aligned to the grid, we need to ensure that they're aligned to each other. Because ultimately, these are going to be tracing guides. We want to be able to model a certain element from the front and then to see its relative position on the side and the top. And I want that position of that piece of geometry to match the reference image's location as well. So let's do it real fast. I'm kind of disciplined in this. I always start with the front. In the front, I consider the master image, right? And I triple check to make sure that this image is perfectly aligned to the grid and is perfectly aligned to the center of the axes that I know I'm going to be mirroring geometry along. And it is. Life is good. Now that this one's done, I lock it down. This is the master image, and I don't touch this image ever again. Because we're going to be aligning the other two, the side image and the top image, to it. Okay? So if we keep moving the master, we're going to find ourselves in this endless edit loop. Okay? And they'll never get aligned to each other. You got to lock down one. And for me, it's always the front.
So should we literally lock the layer?
You can. You're more than welcome to. If you go over into your item list, here's the front. You can right-click on it, and then what is it? Down here at the bottom, somewhere there's lock and unlock. So you're more than welcome to do that. Okay? All right. So now what we need to do is that we need to find a couple points in here, a couple details of the front picture that we can easily find and see in the picture on the side, right? Because I need to start scaling these objects to each other to ensure that they're all in the approximate size, okay? The wheels are good, okay? So what details of the wheel can we easily see on the front and the side image?
The rim or whatever?
Yeah, so maybe the bottom of the wheel and the top of the wheel, right? Because I can very easily see the bottom of the wheel here. And of course I can see the top. Okay, that's a good point. I like that. Now, another thing that we can easily see is the bottom of the wheel and then the top of the catapult arm. Okay, those are very easily seen in both images. And what I'm going to do is just go on to an empty mesh item, and I'm going to throw down some geo real fast. These are just going to be simple cubes. No sense in making this difficult. Okay. And I've already noticed something that I'm going to change. I didn't get the bottom of the wheel precisely dialed where I want it to be. That's perfect, okay? I'm actually going to use the center line of the y-axis as one of my initial reference points. And then I'll use this cube here, just a simple two-dimensional cube. Move it down, and this is going to represent the top of the wheel. Now, you got these little tread things on your wheels, so you have to make a determination as to what point and what pixel in the photograph you're going to be aligning these two. I'm going to do it to the top of the wheel. Okay, awesome. Let's go into perspective, and I'm going to extrude this shape out and look at it from the side. I'll move it forward exclusively along the z-axis, and you can already see that we have a very large issue in front of us, right? What is that issue? The wheels don't match, right? The bottom of that cube, the edge on the bottom of that cube represents the top of the wheel from the front photograph, right? So what do I need to do to this, to my side photograph? Any takers? Bump, bump, bump. Yeah, I just need to make this photograph bigger. Now, luckily for us, we have a couple different ways that we can do this. Of course, I'm going to go into item mode, and I want to scale this thing up. Notice where the scale handles are. Since I've intelligently designed the entire network of reference images around the origin, changing the action center to an origin action center may give us, pretty steep dividends here, right? Let's check it out. Because I don't want to scale around its current location, the action handles being here. Let's change our action center to origin. And now, check it out. Now we can start scaling this guy up. Bum, 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 and, it's going to be a little dork, it looks like. But there we go. I was doing the coplanar handle, not the... and wonderful. That's close enough for me. Oops, excuse me. Yeah, I'm good. Aha, wonderful. Perfect, okay? Mission accomplished. Now let's test it one more time. From the front, go back in and grab that piece of geo. Let's move it to the top of the catapult's basket. And wonderful. From the side image, it's all dialed in, proving that the front image and the side image are the exact same size. The details that we see in the picture from the front matches the relative location of that detail in the side picture. It's proof. Okay, this is proof. Questions? Okay, so we've got to do this one more time. Now, which image are we going to look at first in our last adjustment? The front. Why? Because it's the master, right? We always start with the master and then align one of the other ones. So we did master side. Now we're going to do master top, okay? We're going to go through the exact same kind of thought process, the exact same sequence. We're going to look at the front image. Now, what details in the front of the picture itself can we easily see on the catapult picture on the top, excuse me?
The wheels can just hang that outer edge.
Yeah, so the outer edge, maybe even the axles, right? We can very easily define the total width of our catapult, very easily. So let's just do it. I'm going to recycle this reference plane, rotate it 90 degrees, yoink, there we go, and then just place it at the alignment area that I'm after, maybe right around and there. Wonderful, okay, great. Now I'll simply copy it, paste, move the duplicate copy, there we go, to the other side and define its placement in reference to the image, right around and there. Wonderful. Okay, let's look at our image from the top. And what's our problem here? So what do I need to do, John? And you're right. Scale it up. You got it. Let's scale this bad boy up some. You certainly could, or you can put it at none. Whatever you want, whatever works easily for you. Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm happy with that. Wonderful. Now, we know beyond any reasonable doubt that all three of our reference images are in alignment with each other, okay? Because we've tested them. We've included some reference geometry that showcases and illustrates the position, the relative position of details within the photograph from photograph to photograph. Let's do one final test, and this is going to be it, right? This is going to be the pièce de résistance. It will tell us precisely if we've done our mission correctly. I always like to throw down a piece of reference geometry, or just a piece of geometry, that roughly matches a detail of the image, because this is the workflow that we want to go through now, okay? Because we want to be able to very quickly define, and I'll put it kind of like halfway through the wheels. I know that's not accurate, but bear with me. Okay, so there's that front board. Let's look at it from the top, because we can easily see it here. Cool. And that's probably right. Probably right. Let's do another one. Let's do one of the wheels. The wheels would probably would have been the best one. And if I remember correctly, on the catapult itself, the board that I was just ironing out had some bevel inset detail. That was probably, there we go. Am I close? And I'm close there. Oops, looks like I did a three-dimensional cylinder. Didn't want that. Let's extrude this shape out. I can use that front reference image now to get it where I want it to go. So I'm actually modeling to the geometry now. Let's look at it from the side, looking good. Looking at it from the front, looking good. Life is good. Now I know beyond any reasonable doubt that what I have created here, this little cylinder, matches the location of the wheel in all three photographs. Mission accomplished. I know beyond any reasonable doubt that all of our reference images, our little network, is working in harmony with each other. Okay? Pretty cool, huh? Pretty cool. All right, I tell you what. Let's just take a couple minutes and do this. Okay? Let's take a little break, and we'll get this kind of done. Okay? I want you guys to be able to walk away today having this step dialed in and mastered. Okay? So let's take a break. Let's do. Well, not take a break. Let's just get to work, okay? And I'll walk around. I'll answer questions and make sure that everyone is rocking and rolling the way we should be rocking and rolling. Okay, so let's get back to it. I wanted to spend some additional time today naturally talking about UV mapping, because as part of the first stage, if you will, of this assignment, you're going to have to go in and create a whole series of UVs for your objects, okay? Now, there's a lot on your treasure chest that should be pretty easy. For the most part, a majority of the polygons that you're going to be unwrapping are going to be planar, right? So think about it. What tool is best used for planar surfaces when it comes to UV? Project from view, absolutely. It's a good tool, okay? I like project from view. Whenever I'm UV mapping a complex shape like this, I always go for the low-hanging fruit first, okay? Naturally, the low-hanging fruit is going to be the flat surfaces, because I can just knock these out pretty quickly, okay? However, now that we're starting to UV map and understand the texturing pipeline a little bit more, it's important to think about the role of these UVs inside the texturing stage. How are we going to be using these over in Photoshop, right? Or how is Photoshop's pipeline going to give us the best result, okay? Because all we're going to get is like a coloring book, okay? So start conceptualizing and thinking about how you want your texture to look while you're UV mapping. That will lead some decisions. So let me show you what I'm talking about, okay? Of course, down here at the bottom, we have some low-hanging fruit and some planar surfaces. And let me turn off the grid, excuse me. But over here on the metal frame, and let me just hide all of this stuff so we're not being confused by it. This is the original high poly shape. I just want to start focusing on the metal frame. There we go. So those are the metal frame pieces, okay? Now, ultimately, what I would love to have is the illusion of this metal frame be like metal, right? And I want the details of the metal to be wrapped and projected along very specific orientations. Put yourself into the mind frame of a metalsmith who would be making this frame for your treasure chest, okay? What kind of material would they use to make a metal frame like this? One of the reasons I like working with kind of like medieval projects is that the construction methods for a lot of those shapes were pretty simple back in, like, you know, the 12 and 1300s, right? In the Dark Ages, okay? The medieval era. Very, very simple, right? So if this is a metal frame, how would you make that metal frame with 1300 AD technology?
Hammer it out.
Hammer it out. What kind of material would you use for a metal frame like this? Bronze or steel or something. You'd probably start with maybe a tube. Okay, not a tube, excuse me, wrong word. A cube. You know, a long rectangular flat piece of metal, right? Of course, they didn't have the technology way back in the 1300s to create, you know, hollowed out aluminum frames like we have today, right? They didn't have that, right? So the metal frame would be one solid piece of metal that they hammered into a shape and then bent or welded, you know, because they had welding is nothing new. I mean, we've been doing this for a while, okay? They welded it together, fused them together in specific areas, right? So the top piece here, and each one of these members of our frame, in actuality, would probably be a flat metal piece, you know, a flat metal bar, okay? So when I'm designing the UVs for this, I want the transition from the top of that selection to the face of that selection to be consistent, okay? I don't want to spread them apart and have them on their own separate UV islands. Why not? It'll be potentially a little bit distorted, okay?
Can you not export it to Photoshop?
You can. Let's illustrate this for a second here. And I think I have a metal texture just chilling on my desktop or somewhere on my computer here. And I'm going to focus all of my energy just on this one piece. So I'll Shift H to hide it, and I'll use the unwrap tool. Bloop. There it is. There's the piece. Okay, looking pretty great. Okay, haha, awesome. Let's throw this into a material called this metal. And I think somewhere on my machine here, let's see, let's go into the bowels of this iMac, see what we can find. I think I have a metal texture still in my folder here. we go. Okay, there it is. Wonderful. Okay, let's just triple check, make sure it's using the UV map under the texture locator. UV map, awesome. And the UV map that it's using is called texture. Let's just triple check, make sure that's the correct one, and it is. So we're using the correct UV map. So we're getting a nice representation here of the projection of the texture onto that shape. And you can see what we're getting here. It looks like one solid piece of metal. If we were to experiment and we rotate it 90 degrees, what would we get? Put it in there. Even better. Now we actually see a little bit more of the scratches flow in the right direction. Okay, this is good. It looks like one piece. Okay, if we were to do this, if we were to have them separate pieces, and I want to show you something that is dangerous. So if you're following along and you enable this next feature, make sure you turn it back off because this will drive you crazy. Okay. I can separate my UV islands pretty quickly inside of my UV editing workspace, okay? So if I fire off the move command inside of my UV tools, which is that guy, down here in our tool options, check it out. We actually have a sub option here called tear off, and that's going to allow me to separate things. Okay. And I'm going to put this in a radically different area, okay? And now, on this particular, here we'll do this, we'll really break it, because on this particular texture you really can't notice, but if I was to yeah, there we go. Now, if you look visually at it, it looks like two pieces of metal, right? Wherever we create a seam, that new UV island is going to be in a different part of the texture, and it's not going to look as though it's one cohesive piece, okay? Something that we want to strive to avoid as much as we can, okay? It's going to add realism, because ideally over in Photoshop, I just want to throw a picture of a piece of metal in that area. Let me go back in time, get everything back in piece. There we go. Okay. Ideally, I just want to throw a picture of a piece of metal in this area, and life is good. Okay. Then we can move on, and it all looks like one consistent piece. Whenever we separate our UVs and get them onto their own UV island, we're going to infuse in a seam. Okay. We want to strategically place these seams to get the illusion that we're after. Let's do another pillar of my metal frame to help illustrate this. I'll unhide the rest of my mesh. And I'm going to work with this guy. So I want to try to keep this all one piece. Shift H. I'll run UV unwrap. It's going to be initial planar projection. There we go. Awesome. Wonderful. And I'm going to grab that one and that one. I'm going to pack them. There we go. So now they all share the exact same textile density. I'll throw that into my metal texture. Yeah. And this is what I'm looking for, and I apologize. When you zoom in, it kind of gets blurry. But this is what I'm looking for, okay? You can see the pattern of the metal bar is wrapping around the object, giving us the illusion that this is one solid piece, okay? Giving us the illusion that this is one solid piece of metal on our polygons. Now here's another great trick. I'm going to orient this piece. Let's just do it vertically. Wonderful. Now we're ready to keep going. Yeah, see, it just visually looks like one piece, right? And this is the type of mitered edge that we're looking for. It's okay in the corner that the texture doesn't line up, right? Because now we've created the illusion just by separating out these two pieces onto their own UV island that they are in fact different metal bars welded together in the corner, okay? Ultimately, this is what we're not after. And a lot of folks make this mistake when they're UV mapping. They won't consider this idea of separate pieces in there. And they'll go in and they'll grab like all of these. Let's just grab the bottom. They'll do this. This is fast, this is easy, and it gives you a result, okay? I'm not even going to say a good result, it just gives you a result. Make sure I got everything selected here the way I want. Yeah, they'll do this. They'll do Shift H, and they'll unwrap this. Let's look at the result, which is not a good one. It's a little janky, okay? And let's get all of those polygons assigned to the material so they all get that metal texture. Okay, now on the surface you're like, Pat, what are you talking about? That looks awesome. Even with the distorted UVs over there, you're probably going, whoa, awesome, this is good, right? But it's not good, and here's why. Because we haven't created the illusion of separate metal beams, okay? If you were a blacksmith making this piece, you're not going to have the luxury of a gigantic piece of metal, of metal that's humongous like a sheet of plywood. You're not going to stamp out a pattern. Back in the 1300s, they didn't have that. They had raw stock, and they welded it together with separate pieces, okay? If you begin to conceptualize how someone would actually make it, the texturing and the creation of your UVs actually goes a little bit faster, and you're going to get a much more accurate result, okay? And you're going to get a result that you can customize and make look awesome in the later stages of this process, okay? Does it make sense? Yeah? Okay. I want to show you one other thing, and there's a lot left in here. I want to talk about some interesting challenges, okay? And on my treasure chest, of course, these are the pieces that I have for my handle. They're incredibly high resolution, but they're going to work out pretty well. Let's talk about how we're going to create this UV, okay? Interesting shape. Doesn't have a back, because we're never going to see the back, right? It's going to be pushed up against the next, up next to the treasure chest, so don't need those polygons. But how am I going to unwrap this in a pretty, realistic way? Think like a blacksmith. How would you make this? Take some raw stock, hammer it into a shape, right? So in this shape is all going to be one piece, okay? We don't want to see any visible seams on each one of those hemispheres, okay? So ideally, I want all of this to be one UV island, okay? But man, managing this edge loop going around can be a little bit of a problem. Does anyone have any ideas on how I can quickly unwrap this shape and get a very controllable result?
Select the seams and use the UV peeler or the unwrap tool.
Unwrap tool is definitely the one that I would use. Now, which edges would we select?
The ones going around it, right?
Kind of, yes, absolutely. Imagine this is a cardboard cereal box, okay? And you need to flatten this cardboard cereal box out, okay? Which edges would you select? The corners going around all these radiuses, okay? Which happens to be almost every single edge in this bit here, okay? So I need to pop these corners here to have it lie flat, okay? Whenever I'm trying to figure out how to unwrap something, I always go back to that cereal box idea, right? How do I cut the corners of my cereal box, or how do I unfold them to get the box to lie flat? I'm actually going to use my up arrow to grab all of them. Go. Excellent. And then I'll also grab this. I've learned this, that the unwrap tool really, really likes it when the borders of your object are selected. The opening, like that. Now let's run unwrap. Wonderful. Pretty good result, right? Pretty good result. Very consistent. Let's throw that into that metal texture that we were working with before and see what we get. Now, for the most part, it's pretty good, right? I'm happy with this. We have some overlapping in the corners, but I can live with that. Well, I can kind of live with that. And the problem areas here are over there. Now, with the texture there, you really don't notice any sort of distortion, even though there is. There's some areas of our object that are sharing texture information. You don't see too much of it, but we can change this a little bit. We can change it. Let's just see what happens when we start changing it. I'm going to weld those two verts together using a really fun series of commands called move and sew. So here's move and sew. If you go with options, sew, which is the fancy word for weld or join, we'll get this crazy little popover. And it says connect to average. And so now it's going to look at the distance between the two selected verts. It's going to weld them, but it's going to place them in the middle of their location. Let's hit OK. you can see what we get. Now we've infused a distortion in there, so let's see. That may not be what we want. Sometimes manually going in, yeah. I always experiment with this, and this seems to be a great place where we don't want to do that. I'm just going to live with the overlapping UVs. I'd rather not have that distortion. Now areas in here though, check it out. I would try it. Let's see where those verts are. Let's see what happens if I weld these two together. So, oops. So, average. Yeah, not as bad on these over here. Yes, and if you look at the way that the texture is showing up, it's a little bit more consistent. Yeah, I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this. This will help the quality of our baking too. So I would continue working myself all the way around. Okay. The last thing I want to show you, and then we'll start working on our lab today, is how to work with this piece here. It's all one piece. For most folks, you would start freaking out right now. Okay. How in the world are we going to UV map this piece? The handle. We got to have UVs for it. Because in the game art pipeline, everything gets UVs. How are we going to do this? So let's break it down. It's actually not that bad. Let's break it down into its component pieces. Okay. If you remember the wine barrel, this is basically the wine barrel on steroids, right? On cylindrical shapes, we want to end up with a UV island that's like a grid. What tool should we use to create the initial UV of my handle here? Unwrap. The unwrap tool is our guy, right? Because the unwrap tool excels. It absolutely excels at cylindrical objects. Now we have to go in and figure out, now we can't have these caps down here. This is a problem for us with the unwrap tool. That's not going to work, okay? So what we're going to do is that we're going to add, there's two things that you can do. This is totally cool. You can go in, grab these polygons, do shift up arrow a couple times to expand the selection, like that, and then just hide the polygons. That's fine. There we go. And now, check it out. I'm going to grab this back seam, that one right there. Where we select, that's going to represent the seam in the UV island. So I'm not going to pick the top one because I don't want my audience to see it, but I'll pick the bottom one down over here, kind of hiding it a little bit. And then I'll grab the openings on either side. Let's run the unwrap tool now. Pretty cool, huh? Done. Well, are we done? I don't know. Let's find out. Okay? Let's throw this into a new material called test. Let's throw that checker pattern in there. So, images, UV, and I'm just going to throw in my favorite. Okay, rock and roll. Okay, so we have some issues in here. Pop quiz. The current size of the UV island is presenting or is creating this type of projection on the handle. Is there any way I can make the grid squares on the handle smaller? You can scale the actual UV. That's one way of doing it. But at the end of the day, we're going to need that UV island sitting inside the positive grid or the positive quadrant of our grid. Is there another way that we can do it? The horizontal and vertical wrap, which is like repeating the texture over and over again. So if I go grab the actual image inside of my shader tree and explore its texture locator properties, this horizontal and vertical wrap value is going to allow us to repeat the texture inside of that positive UV quadrant. Think of it like this. Right now at a value of 1, that texture, that grid texture, is only being stamped down one time inside of the positive UV quadrant. If I was to increase it to 2, it would stamp it down 2 times. Okay? Let's do it, or 4 times. That was absolutely right. Where I said, yeah, let's do it a value of 3 by 3. Yeah, and now we can kind of see the quality of our UVs a little bit more. And overall, they're not bad. Actually, the UV unwrap tool has done a great job, but you can see some issues in there. You can see some distortions in here where the pattern isn't necessarily following the flow of the geometry the way I would want it to. Me being me, I tend to get nitpicky about this, okay? Some people will be like, done, moving on. I'm a little OCD about this, so I go a little crazy. Now, here's what I don't want to do, right? We saw this with the wine barrel, right? Where you're going through and adjusting every edge, and that's fixing a lot of the problems down the length of the cylinder. I have to do this both left and right and up and down on this UV island. That's going to just take a lot of time. I don't want to do that, okay? The guys down at the foundry have created a piece of technology that is quite amazing when it comes to UV islands. It's stellar. This is actually one of the new tools inside of 901 that has rocked my world. Believe it or not, it's called Rectangle. It's just called Rectangle, and you can see it over here inside of our tool options. It's right above Symmetrize UVs, okay? So I'm going to double click on this bad boy, choose Rectangle. You can, there's some options in here. Uniform X and Y spans, maybe something to look at. I'm going to leave them at the defaults, but just watch what happens to my UVs when I hit OK. Bloop. Let's do that again, because it happens real fast. Rectangle. Bloop. And we're done. Absolutely. I know. I'm a son of a gun, aren't I? Yeah, I'm a son of a gun. Sometimes I gotta. Huh? There is. It's not perfect. But it definitely gets us into that grid pattern in one click. I still have some work in here that I do, because you're absolutely right, Tyler. If you look at the way the texture is being projected on the front, those grid squares are a little squished. Okay. However, I now have options. Okay. I could very easily go in and let's see, it's these in here. What if I went in and just started scaling this? I'm doing the whole thing, which is intentional. Let's see. Yeah, so now I had to figure out the scale ratio to get the rest of this working. Okay? But for me, this is kind of one of those moments where, well, let's try this. Let's do this. What if we did a linear fall off? Because we can absolutely do that in here. And I'm actually going to do a little symmetry here. If I start scaling this out, let's see. Can I get it to go the way I want it to go? Absolutely. I can get it much closer. Okay? It's actually not so bad. Now, I'm done. And then I'll fit the UVs back inside of my positive UV quadrant. And I think I'm ready to move on. Okay? I'm ready to move on. It's pretty cool. Now, I still have those end caps that I need to do, right? I'm not completely done with this. I still have those end caps. Can't forget those end caps. Does anyone have a creative solution for these end caps?
Don't you just probably the cylinder.
So let's try it. I like it. So the suggestion was made to use the UV projection tool. Projection type cylinder. We'd blast it down the z-axis. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Let's throw it into our test pattern. Some problems in there. Some problems. I would unwrap it. It's really easy to unwrap it. Okay. For me, the edge selection system that I would use would be something that looks like this. Okay. Let's just see what that gets us. Run the unwrap tool. Cylindrical along the Z. Now I have two of these. I didn't select the edges of its neighbor over here in the back, which is why it's going on that one. This is the one that I just worked on, and that's pretty good looking. Okay. If you look at what we got going down in here, life is good. We got some issues along this edge in here, but I think I'm going to live with it. Okay. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make as artists is that we spend far too much time looking at our model from this perspective when our audience is only ever going to look at it from this perspective. Do you see the errors in my UV maps from out here? No. I'm moving on. I get myself caught up in that world from time to time. Now, we want to make sure that the size of all of our UV islands are proportional to each other. If you look carefully at this UV island, you can see that the density of our texture is pretty tight inside of that area, especially in comparison to the rest of the handle. We need to establish uniform textile density, as it's called. We talked a little bit about this before, right? Where all the UV islands need to be the correct relationship and size to each other, okay? The pack command does a great job at establishing this textile density for us. And let me just fix this real fast because it's driving me crazy. I didn't have that selection in there. I just kind of guessed. Yeah. There we go. And it messed up one more time. Let's see. What's my settings? So it's just going to be a little dork. I'm actually going to delete those UVs, and let's redo it real fast. Okay. You're just going to be a little dork today. So I'm going to run a great tool called UV Relax. Okay, it's like a big iron. And it's kind of doing it, but then again, it's kind of not. Oops, shouldn't have done that. The symmetrize UVs is a great command, but it takes forever to evaluate. And it often is the source of a lot of crashes inside of Moto. I do it out of habit. When presented with a big problem where very clearly this polygon here is the problem, often what I do is that I rip off that polygon, relax the UVs, and everything usually kind of gets to where it should be, and then I'll go in and re-UV that one polygon and weld it back together. Sew it back together like I showed you guys earlier. It's going to crash on me. I apologize. Many apologies. Save and save often, right? You never know, especially when UV mapping, because the last thing you want to do is go back in and do your UVs, right? Oh man, save hey, and there it is, Moto crash report. Ding ding, I crashed the application.
Send him a really angry crash report.
That would go over poorly, I think. I'm friends with the individuals that read all the crash reports, so I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm like, hey man, fix this problem immediately. Oh man. Anyways, I apologize for the crash. It is kind of par on course. All right.
Personal messages that way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I don't know if he does it anymore. I hope that he does it. But the president of what used to be Luxology that created Moto initially, I remember him saying a couple years ago that he read every single crash report because they had it set up within their system that whenever they got a crash report, it would immediately be sent to a couple different people within the company, including himself. So he said he read every single crash report, and I'm sure people left him lovely notes. I gotta imagine they did. Yeah, right. I know I would. No, he's a pretty cool guy for the most part. His name's Brad Peebler. Actually, I shouldn't say for the most part. He is a cool guy. I'm not going to reopen Moto because we're at the end of our time together today. But hopefully using those new UV tools and this new UV mindset will help you very quickly get to the end of your UV stage. Use rectangle. It is awesome. And think like the person that built the darn thing. It's going to help you make strategic UV mapping decisions. Because we want to be able to create a texture set over in Moto or over in Photoshop that's awesome. Okay. It all comes down to the coloring book that we create in Moto. Yeah?
If you wanted to create a futuristic futuristic treasure chest or something, how would we go into that mindset of like, how would they make it? Or would we go mostly based on looks and kind of?
Yeah, then it's look. Then it's look. Oh, and come up with something though. Maybe you have a fancy laser etching machine in the future that creates all these insets and these fancy details for you. Have fun with that one. And just look at a lot of reference too. Look at reference, reference, reference. The cool thing about the science fiction world is that everyone has kind of a slightly different take on what the future is going to look like. Yeah. But there are some common themes inside the future, the science fiction genre.
Rectangle tool sometimes says that it's not as a grid-based UV and it won't work.
Yeah. So the question was, the rectangle tool doesn't work, and you're going to get an error message saying, basically, it can't figure out how to make the grid out of the UVs that you've created. There is a way around it. It's not so much a way around, but it's something that I would explore. Whenever I'm designing my UVs, I always kind of walk through this process organically, and I come at it with the willingness to experiment. So this is what I would experiment in a situation like that. Real fast. I'm going to just use the tube tool. There we go. It's a fun shape. Okay. And let's go in. There we go. Let's go into my UV edit window. Now, it made all the UVs for me, but actually it did a really horrible job. Yeah, so this is what we're often used to getting, right? This is not going to work. Let's try see if rectangle works. I'm not convinced it's going to work, but then it did. So, yay, Moto, rectangle, you're awesome. Okay. There is one other tool in here that you can look at. Something that I would explore. It's a part of UV Relax, and it's Straighten. Okay. Straighten is going to try to do its best to find consistent edge segments and try to normalize them a little bit. Okay, let me show you what this looks like. Now mine are pretty normal. Yeah. There we go. See how it took all those bent edge segments and just kind of flattened them out into a straight line? That's what Straighten's going to do in the UV Relax command. Now rectangle is going to do, whoop, guarantee it's going to do its thing, and it did. This is actually kind of game-changing, and the rectangle command is one of those that all 3D apps should have. It's worth the price of admission into the Moto world. Believe it or not, if you're struggling with the UV tools inside of Moto, that's good, because this is not easy content. But this is the easiest and the most powerful tool set in the industry. I love the UV mapping tools in Moto. They're great. All right, other questions? Okay, let's revisit what the expectations are for this week. Then I'll let you guys get out of here. So, as a subtle little reminder, you're doing two things this week. Of course, a number of you have already made good progress on your catapult. Please continue to go down that path and create this model. It should be a fun one, okay? Don't get too zeroed in on some of the details, but make a cool model. Make a model that will serve your future, okay? Take every opportunity to make a cool portfolio render. So you're going to finish the catapult, and of course, you're also going to be creating your custom, unique, never been seen before treasure chest, okay? Next week, you're going to be making the model and the UVs. Next week, we're going to spend all of our time, and I mean all of our time, on texture painting, okay? And some legit painting. It's not just photo collage work that we've kind of been doing, you know. We're going to be doing some painting next week. We're going to bring out all the Wacom tablets. We're going to do some painting in class. It's going to be a fun week. You don't want to miss next week. It's going to be a lot of goodness in there. A lot of fun stuff. Questions, expectations. Everyone understanding it? All right, good luck. I'll see you guys next week.